Salutations, everyone. Salamander here, and today I am going to begin Chapter 1 of the Dark Theory Mythos. Within this chapter, I am going to cover the Hadal dimension, and I will probably break this all up into multiple videos. So in this video, I'm just going to give a brief or somewhat brief summary of the Hadal dimension as a whole, and then make other videos that are going to go in more depth onto the things I kind of uh, bring up. So to begin, the Hadal dimension is essentially what we would probably refer to by many names as the dark dimension, the shadow realm, the void, the abyss, and so on. And many species within our universe believe that this Hadal dimension is essentially the first plane of existence, the first universe that ever came to be. Now, as to how other universes came into existence thereafter isn't entirely understood or known. There's various ways it could have happened, but one of the ways is that it probably is just simply a byproduct of the Hadal dimension's mere existence, and some kind of ethereal energies or whatnot just poofed a whole completely new reality into existence, and then it just kept happening and happening. Now, the Hadal dimension itself, what's in it, is that it's not too dissimilar from our universe in that there are celestial bodies, there are planets, dwarf planets, gas giants, um, moons, and asteroids. However, unlike our reality, there are no stars, there's no nebulas, there are no black holes, there aren't any galaxies, and instead, there are essentially just large clusters of these planets, essentially just somewhat stuck in place by some unknown force, kind of like a sort of strange coral reef. They're not stuck together, but they're kind of just like locked in place in these huge clusters. Now, they do have solar systems. There are solar systems. It's just that, and unlike ours, where like a star would be, or black hole would be at the center, it's likely that the biggest or most dense planet would be at the center of the solar system. And then you have all the planets and revolving around that one, and then there's the asteroid belt. Now, another trait about the Hadal dimension that is unlike ours is that it is known to be one of the few dimensions that is truly infinite, meaning that it just goes on forever. Hence, kind of tying into the idea that it is the first plane of existence that just there ever was. Now, there is a saying, and I don't entirely remember it word for word or the exact words, but I do remember there being, or at least it going along the lines of, when you gaze into the abyss gazes back at you. Now, within the mythos, this is to be taken very literally, as there are things that are indeed living within this dark place, away from all light and whatnot. Now, they aren't exactly eldritchian, unknown, or intangible to perceive creatures. They are very tangible, at least in form. It is more so their nature, their abilities that are kind of not so tangible. Now, what I mean by this is that pretty much everything, whether alive or not alive, has some sort of ethereal uh, characteristic to it or ability. So for creatures, this could come in one of infinite kind of possibilities, like being able to teleport or shapeshift into just some inanimate object or whatnot. And another strange characteristic of all organic life, or at least fauna, in the Hadal dimension is that they all have a black coloration with a pale white patterning that resembles a skeletal system, which is a little strange when you look at things that have no skeletal system and yet they have this kind of patterning on them. Now, no one knows why they have this or why all Hadal dimension creatures that have eyes are all have red eyes. At least from a design standpoint, I made it so that it's um, more recognizable, so you know what is from the Hadal dimension. But anyway, the flora also kind of has a dark coloration, though unlike the creatures, they have a bit more variety in their color, but it's just, all more dark tinted in everything. Now, another thing about life within the Hadal dimension, unlike ours, is that there is life that exists within space. And considering what I said about the whole dimension being infinite and how there are these clusters of planets, meaning that there are areas that are just completely empty. So there isn't a limit as to how large or uh, titanic things can be. This is where, one of the many ways you can say things in the Hadal dimension are just not tangible properly. Now, how creatures in the Hadal dimension that have eyes see is there's this thing called ethereal vision. If you're wondering what that looks like, well, there's a number of ways that can be perceived, but the most baseline average would be to essentially turn around in your room with the light on and essentially pretend that there aren't any shadows there and that the light is a little brighter. That's essentially what Hadal dimension creatures see. So essentially, if that light wasn't there, it would look like a normally lit room in some capacity, as you wouldn't perceive um, darkness or a lack of light. It's not entirely understood how this works. What is understood is that basically everything in the Hadal dimension has ethereal vision. This includes creatures that don't have eyes. It's just that normally, if they don't have eyes, there's a sort of, I guess you could say, a catch to how they see. So maybe they only see by sending out a sound wave or something like that. Or they have organs that allow them to see thermal heat and thus see in thermal vision, sort of. It's an infinite number of possibilities, just like, the infinite number of kind of ways things evolve and adapt to the various planets and all that, as the planets are just as ethereal and mysterious as the life forms themselves, as some planets have some strange weather events or just constant uh, weather, or sometimes they will teleport or whatnot. Again, it's infinite number of possibilities. And Due to the Hadal dimension's uh, presence, its existence, how it's infinite and in a way connected to every reality that exists, there are naturally occurring rifts that happen in just random locations within the Hadal dimension and within whatever dimension that the other side of the rift opens up in. And these rifts essentially usually are what allow things in the Hadal dimension to enter into, say, our reality. And from all the creatures that enter in, there are three categories of creatures that have been essentially, I guess you could say, described or come up with by some of the alien species in our universe. And that the first and most common, basically making up 90% of everything that enters into our reality and thus believed others, are the predator class or predator category. These are essentially carnivores or apex predators or just predators in general. These are creatures that will essentially show up and forcefully integrate themselves into the ecosystem of the planet that they just so happen to be on and establish themselves as the new apex predator. Now, I should mention right now that before you think that you're just going to grab a weapon and actually, gun one of these things down, there is a strange phenomenon in which Hadal dimension creatures cannot be harmed or at least killed by anything else that is not from their dimension. So, basically speaking, these creatures show up in our dimension knowing full well that nothing can stop them from just essentially eating whatever they want or just, going wherever they want. Now, moving on to the second category is the macro hunters. These are essentially super predators in a sense. They are, I guess you could say, if you're familiar with Monster Hunter, combine black dragons with deviants and give them the endless hunger of a devil Joe, and that is essentially a macro hunter. These are giant, well, not all giant, but they're basically just, like I said before, super predators that have absolutely uncanny abilities that far exceed most other creatures. Now, if you're wondering just how much food does a macro hunter need, imagine the entire population that resides within New York City, and that is essentially the baseline, the very least that a macro hunter would need to consume on a daily basis, depending on the size of the individual creature. Now, the ethereal abilities that are displayed by macro hunters, which kind of is a little different from most other creatures, is that their abilities tend to be more destructive. Essentially, say a macro hunter has the ability to essentially just produce fire. It would probably have some ability that would allow it to essentially consume, like, say, the smoke or the ashes or the fire itself, essentially allowing it to burn a huge amount of potential food and then consume it in the most easiest manner possible, saving it a lot of time and energy in hunting and whatnot. Hence why they're called macro hunters. But that's just one example of a macro hunter. Now, the most dangerous thing about macro hunters is that they, unlike the predators, are able to enter other realities at will whenever they want, which again can be in various ways. And wherever they show up, they eat so much of everything that they cause an inevitable ecological collapse and thus the fall and eventual extinction of all life on the planet before they just go back to their home dimension on their home planet. And and it doesn't help that they have the uncanny ability to sense the presence or um, heavy presence of species in other dimensions from their own, which they seem to prioritize planets that have a unnaturally high population of one species. And this tends to be technologically advanced species like ourselves, as well, they are usually the ones that are more likely to have such a huge and unnatural population boom that won't go down anytime soon. You could say they're one of the things that could play into the natural filter of alien species. Now, the third category is called the unknown. This is essentially just to be taken as a sort of miscellaneous box. This is where all the creatures that kind of don't fit into the other two categories and, are just kind of a little bit of an anomaly for, you know, the usual, what is to be expected. So this is usually herbivores and small creatures that seem to have just randomly waltzed on through the rifts. Though there are some creatures, like a creature called Extinction, where they are more similar. They have some similarities to, say, predators and macro hunters, but because they display characteristics of both, eh, they are essentially just thrown into this category as well. They just don't fit in any other. Now, you are able to essentially enter the Hadal dimension by artificial means, which those would be referred to as portals or portal technology, though this is normally not recommended, as forcing your way into the Hadal dimension via, exiting your own will cause wear and tear on the space and time that in just all the fabrics of reality that make up your own dimension. This in turn causes an uh, increase in rift activity, which may not sound bad at first, but as 90% of all the creatures entering in through these rifts are going to be predator class creatures or predators. However, this also means that it's more likely that a macro hunter is going to show up somewhere. And considering what I just said about how dangerous they can be, it's not a very good time. And there have been various dimensions that have fallen completely due to essentially having caused too much wear and tear on space and time in their dimension through various means, of course, that essentially caused such an increase in rift activity that, well, there was an even higher um, appearance of macro hunters and thus caused a sort of slow fade into black, if you will, where everything just ceased, essentially just was eaten away till there was no life left. This is a very rare occurrence, but an occurrence nonetheless. Now, the rifts themselves and as to how many of the ethereal uh, characteristics of everything in the Hadal dimension work isn't entirely known, and there's likely never going to be an answer. However, there is a theory that there is something that kind of works like the dark matter in our universe called dark essence, and that this dark essence essentially is what holds the whole Hadal dimension together. And the reason we even have any idea that this exists is that dark essence is this sort of, I guess you could say, a black gaseous energy that emanates off of the rifts when they open up and are open. And this dark essence has a strange interaction with life forms in that, say, an animal like maybe a canine, like a dog, comes into contact with the dark essence. They essentially mutate and evolve into a Hadal dimension creature, a completely new Hadal dimension creature, and are then overcome with this instinct to get back or to enter the Hadal dimension, where they essentially, wherever they end up, integrate into the ecosystem. Now, what happens to something like humans, where we are a technologically and self-aware creature, sentient organism? The dark essence causes a way more different uh, effect. In, Instead of mutating and causing us to essentially become a new Hadal dimension creature, we would essentially lose our sanity. You would, for the rest of your life, see terrifying visions of all the denizens, the inhabitants that reside within the Hadal dimension. Something that would probably be arguably worse than death. And what's even worse is that Hadal dimension creatures will actually actively avoid harming individuals who have essentially had this happen to them. Almost as if they understand that the reason the individual probably was even interacting with the dark essence was it in an attempt to uh, exploit their home reality, and that this is essentially a sort of punishment for them. Now, going back as to when I talked about, how animal life or uh, just animals in general mutate and evolve with the dark essence. This isn't indicative of life within the Hadal dimension. It's not where everything comes from, as everything in the Hadal dimension just kind of happens. They naturally just happen, kind of like how life happened on Earth. They appear, they evolve, some go extinct, others thrive, though something to note is that there is no such thing as a technologically advanced species within the Hadal dimension. As why would you need it if you are a creature that can just biologically teleport from one planet to another at will, or say teleport into another reality and just feast on everything there? This is at least from my design standpoint, was to essentially highlight how alien and just, I guess, more nightmarish or dream-like or and whatnot these things are from, what we expect from alien life. And I wanted them to feel more than just some, uh, I guess, Lovecraftian thing. A bit like they're kind of Lovecraftian, but in a more tangible manner, I guess, if that makes any sense. Now, I think that's gonna just about wrap it up for now. If I might have forgotten some things, and if I did, I'll make sure to cover them in their own video and their as I'm gonna cover the predators, the macro hunters, and the unknowns, and all the specific individual creatures that you probably saw on the list if you did see it. So don't worry, I'm gonna cover them. In fact, I might cover some of those things in their own respective videos, most prominently the macro hunters, like each individual macro hunter might get their own video in themselves. And I'm sorry if there's not going to be too much to see. I haven't exactly, I do have some of these things that I've drawn, but I haven't drawn every last thing. But for the things I have drawn, I will try to make sure to, have it there so you can see it. So you at least have a bit of a better representation on, what these kind of things look like. Um, so to essentially just say again, the next couple of videos are just all going to be on the Hadal dimension, and when uh, and nearing the end of that, I'm probably going to begin talking about where our universe was first created, and thus will usher in chapter 2, and then there's going to be all the stuff surrounding that. Um, I'm sorry if this isn't super formal or uh, scripted or whatever. Um, I simply wanted to make these so I could at least try to, in some capacity, share this mythos with everyone. This is a mythos that I've been, uh, I guess, developing since I was in high school. In fact, the Hadal dimension was the sole, um, I guess, point of the Dark Theory mythos, where it would just be surrounding the Hadal dimension and how it interacts with our own reality as well as others. And it also used to be simply called the Dark Dimension, but I recently changed, probably like 2 years ago or so, changed it to the Hadal dimension, which I will that will become more that will essentially just be self-explained when I talk about our universe, how it works in the lore of the mythos. So anyway, I hope this was at least um, somewhat enjoyable. Hopefully, it was a bit interesting, and I'm hoping that as I talk about stuff going forward, some of the stuff is going to be more developed than others. Um, the reason I'm covering the Hadal dimension first is, well, one, it kind of fits into the story, and two, I wanted to start off um, from an area where there's a lot. As you if you see, again, if you've seen the list, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of terms, and I wanted to um, essentially just talk about the mythos and everything in an order that I believed would make you not sit there and go like, "What the hell is he talking about?" So if there's stuff that you're wondering about, don't worry that it's inevitably going to be covered in there in the this I guess series of videos I'm going to make every so often. It took me this a bit long to make this because I had to figure out how to essentially explain the Hadal dimension. Because doing this, I realized that it's a little hard to explain when I kind of know exactly what I'm talking about, but no one else probably is not going to. Hence, again, why I'm starting at the Hadal dimension and trying to start where there's not so many terms and it's a bit more easier to kind of digest. I'm sorry if I'm taking too long. Um, I should probably make a whole video just talking about the my um I guess reasoning behind the mythos. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed. I hope this was all at least somewhat interesting, and I'm hoping that you all find the subsequent stuff that I cover, that I talk about, at least again somewhat interesting. And I will see you all next time. Goodbye.